let's take a look at the instruments, like the tracks I've been doing with the drums for this remix. As you can see, we have this section with the drums here, and it includes different kinds of stuff I've been trying out. We have some toms here, itty bitty small sections of toms I've recorded. Originally I had a whole lot more, like rhythms from the Korg KR55, but eventually it boiled down to this, and actually this whole remix is not that drum heavy. So I have the toms here, and I also have some snares that I kind of experimented with. At first I had them produced for my Pearl DRX electronic drum module from the 80s. It sounds really cool. We can try to listen to them here. Of course, with a lot of effects on. So later on, I tried replacing them with a 707 Roland 707 snare instead, for a drum sound that was maybe a little less dominating. You can hear it here. Let's try to solo it. This actually took a while to produce, because the drum sound in itself is not, I mean, it's pretty simple and pretty short and pretty clean also. So I had to experiment quite a bit with using different types of distortion and stuff. I actually have a whole group just dedicated to this snare sound. If I can make a loop here, and let's see, about here maybe, and let's go into the group and see what treatment I've been using. The snare group is over here. Yeah, this one. So we can start with the. Actually, I can try to turn off everything. I mean, the saturation is not enabled, but the other ones. So this is kind of the bare 707 snare drum. And then I had an idea. I mean, usually you might say, like, as an audio engineer, that there's a certain way to add processing, like adding compressors, reverbs, delays, and so on. And usually people say that you should add like compressors first, and then maybe echoes, and then last like reverb. And I also do that, but for this type of sound, I really wanted it to be pretty loud and pretty raw and huge. So I had an idea that I needed to as one of the first effects, use reverb, and then after that compression and distortion and whatnot. So you actually kind of distort the reverb, kind of what you might do if you had a guitar amplifier and you played it really, really loud and it had a built-in spring reverb. Then the spring reverb would also be distorted, right? So I start with this EMT. So that already gives you, like, gets you in the ballpark, right? And then a compressor. This is just a built-in compressor of Cubase. It just compresses it a little bit, like maybe 4 or 5 dBs. And then the distortion, the saturation wasn't enabled. This is actually also the built-in distortion. I tried different types of distortion. I also have like commercial distortion plugins, but this turned out to get me where I wanted to be with this sound. So this gets it pretty dirty. And then an EQ. And this actually cuts some of the high end because I felt it was kind of too hi-fi. I mean, it's maybe not that noticeable, but I'm already beginning to cut like at 6K, and then gradually more and more, just to take off the high end, the high frequencies a bit. All right. Let's take a look at the saturation. I didn't use it, but let's take a look anyway. Yeah, so this is a soft tube saturation. It's kind of like it's not a distortion as such. It's more like a preamp. Yeah. Maybe my idea was to use this instead of the other distortion. So, I mean, you decide which one of the distortions sounds the best. I went with this one anyway. Okay. So let's see what we else have here. So we have a whole section of 707. So actually the kick drum that you hear is, as far as I remember, it's also a 707 kick, but as it turns out, it's not part of this group anyway. So I'm kind of mystified where that kick is. It's not here anyway. Let's take a look. Okay, I actually thought that the kick drum was a 707 kick drum, but as it turns out, it wasn't. I found it, and it's down here. It was a Linn kick drum, actually from a plugin. For some reason, I liked this more than the 707, which is a hardware drum machine I have in my studio. Let's take a look at the Linn. It's this one. Let's hear how it sounds. And there's a short reverb on as well. And that's the RMS. Let's take a look at the effects on this. So it's this one. So just for experimentation, let's try to mute this Linn drum and hear what the 707 would have sounded like on this remix. So I think this is the direct signal from the 707. You could also use, I tried tracking it through a valve compressor that I have, like a universal audio valve compressor. Sounds like this. I mean, it's kind of noisy, but I mean, when the music plays, you don't really hear it. I could add a noise gate on it, but apparently I didn't, so that's fine. I'm going for the lo-fi sound anyway, so yeah. And finally, I also tracked it through, I have an old Roland mixer with built-in spring reverb, and I tried tracking the 707 kick through that, so let's hear how that sounds. Okay, so apparently I didn't use the built-in spring reverb from the mixer. So just for fun, let's try to hear one of these as compared to the one I ended up with, which was the Lin kick drum. I mean, if anything, the Lin is a bit softer, so that might have been like the argument for using it. Yeah, so let's move on. I also tried tracking, instead of using software effects, I tried tracking this kick drum through a hardware unit which is called DEP5. And let me check, that's an old Roland effects unit, hardware unit from the 80s as well. Let's try hearing it. Okay, sounds cool. We can try to listen to it with the music also. I think I actually didn't use this gated reverb from the DEP5 because the whole remix in itself had lots of effects, time-based effects like echo and reverb already. So I felt that the kick needed to tie it down, like to pull it together. So that's why I kind of wanted to use a kick drum that was completely dry to pull it in, so to speak. So, but I also have some spring reverb I experimented with at some point, and since it's in stereo, I'm pretty sure I recorded. I have a Ramona stereo spring reverb, a DSR3, and it sounds like this. Let's hear it with the kick. But again, you don't really hear the spring reverb because the whole, especially the vocals, are pretty drenched in echo and reverb already. So I didn't use the spring reverb either. So yeah, Then there's this section under, which is like various in English folder with a few other elements. There's a hi-hat from the Boss DR55, a 16th rhythm hi-hat, and actually that's also kind of a nod to old New Order tracks. I really enjoy especially the early stuff from New Order, like their first album, first couple of albums. And especially the first album they made, they used this DR55 on several tracks, and I really like that hi-hat, so I kind of wanted to use it in this remix. It's this one. We've got two effects employed on this one. We've got an SDD 3000 Korg plugin and also an EMC 140. So let's have a listen to the effects. The Korg is over here. This one. You can hear the tail if I start and stop the hi-hats. I can try to switch off the reverb so you can hear it more clearly. I can try to switch off the echo so you can hear the clean hi-hats. I mean, I'm aware that the reverb is taking up a lot of space in the high end, like the high frequencies. Let's try to hear when I switch it off. I mean, it's very different, right? Some might argue that that it sounds better without the reverb, or at least more like cohesive maybe. But I really like that kind of wishy-washy, like a little trashy sound. Okay, so that was the hi-hat. There's also I have this little box called the multicassa. And I experimented with that as well. It's only used for the intro. Let's have a listen to that. It's this one. It's kind of an interesting sound because it almost sounds like acoustic, like it could be played. There's some high-pitched noise there. I think it's from a plugin, maybe. It sounds acoustic, almost like you played it on like a stringed instrument of some sort, muted, plucking, stringy instrument. Let's hear it again, and I can try to kill the effects. I think it's also because it's almost like self-resonating, like it's almost going into feedback. So, but of course, on this sound, the gated reverb from the MS is very important. It kind of makes the sound. is this one. And again, I'm using the non-linear. Alright, that was the multicaster. And that was kind of like the rhythmic stuff for the remix. So let's close up the drums. And next, let's listen to the synthesizers, which is kind of the main part of this remix. Alright, so let's look at the synthesizers. We have the folder here with synths. Let's try to zoom a little bit out so we can see like what's been used. Yeah, so we have like I have a Jupiter 4, which has been used for several things, and we have my trusty stereo spring reverb also in use. We have a Pro-One, also a hardware synth that I'm using in my studio. And we have the Septavox, which is a yellow, pretty interesting keyboard synth instrument from Krita and Guitari. And the Jupiter 4 again with some arpeggiation. I'm also using the OB6. I don't have that OB6 anymore, but I had it at the time when I made the remix, and kind of one of the only things I'm using it for is this kind of shortish vandfald, which is it's a vandfald, which is a waterfall. It just reminded of kind of like a waterfall type of sound. So, but let's start from the beginning and focus in on the Jupiter 4 on the first track here and see what we have. The funny thing with this synth is that when I made it, it's an arpeggiation, of course, but it's, as far as I remember, it's a random arpeggiation. And at first, when you just do random arpeggiation, the notes, of course, are random, so they're all over the place, of course, within the chord that you're holding down on the keys. But when you slice it up and have this, I don't know, 8 bars or 16 bars that you hear over and over again when you're mixing and stuff, at some point it just makes sense, no matter what kind of randomness it had at first. So you have heard this randomness so many times, so it starts to be kind of like a pattern in your head, and you get used to it, and suddenly it doesn't sound random anymore. It sounds like someone deliberately played this stuff. And that's kind of interesting how the brain works in that regard. So, but this is pretty dry, right? So I have the stereo spring reverb again. I mean, here the spring reverb kind of makes the sound once more. I mean, it wouldn't be the same without it. I can try to mute the spring reverb, and let's hear. I mean, it's not at all the same, right? And the spring reverb just have this raw sound about it. Like I think it would be really difficult to recreate that sound like digitally, like in a plugin. I've been searching for plugins for a very long time that perfectly emulates like a real spring reverb, and I haven't found one yet. I mean, it's just so difficult because like a real spring reverb is just all over the place. The springs just bounce in a random fashion. So it's just different each time a new note hits. It's kind of, I think it's kind of impossible to recreate in a plugin. So yeah, but let's move on. I mean, these two sections kind of the same. The only difference is that here I'm not changing the chords. I think I'm just holding one or two notes down, and that's it. So let's move on to the Pro-One. I use that for bass. I should say that in a lot of my stuff, my remixes, but also like the music I do myself, I do a lot of fading. I really like fading, like instruments going in and out on a fade, instead of starting like abruptly, like from the downbeat or whatever, the start of the verse or the chorus or whatever. I really like to make these elements like a cohesive whole, like you almost don't notice suddenly there's just this instrument and where did it come from? I really like that. And for this I use the AMS reverb again. I think several of these tracks are sent to the same AMS non-linear gated reverb. And that's also a thing, like a practice from the old days, that even though you have this DAW and potentially you can just like have a different plugin for each track, and maybe you have like 40 tracks or whatever, and I mean, theoretically it's possible to have a different reverb effect or echo effect on each track, but that doesn't kind of make for a cohesive mix. So I kind of do it the old school style, like in the old days. I mean, especially if it wasn't like a professional studio, if it was just like a 4-track or an 8-track small studio, you only had like a few hardware, you only had a few effects, right? So you just on all your tracks that needed some reverb, you sent to the same reverb effect. So that also kind of gives it makes the tracks like blend together more nicely, I think. But I mean, otherwise this is pretty simple, right? It's just an 8th rhythm, and it just continues like that. So and the next one is a pretty like featured element in the song, like in the remix from after the intro is finished, kind of, and that's the Septavox, and that's this yellow keyboard with these small round wooden buttons, and it sounds kind of amazing. It's probably the only digital instrument I have in my studio, but it have this quirky sound like an old Atari computer or whatever. It's kind of like Nintendo-ish, I would say. So I really like it, and you get some results that's kind of you didn't really expect. this one. And this has also been pretty heavily processed. As you can see, I make a pretty harsh EQ on this, cutting a lot of the bass and boosting a lot of the middle frequencies. It's almost got like an old telephone sound to it. Let's see what this is. Yeah, this is just like a compressor, right? But pretty old school compressor plugin. And I think actually I chose this on purpose to give it this really old school sound, as opposed to using some modern compressor. This is without. And this is enabled. Yeah. And actually, the interesting thing about this is that there's some kind of distortion going on. I'm not sure if you can hear it. If you're listening to this on a set of nice headphones or studio monitors, you can hear pretty clearly that there's some kind of distortion going on this track, and that's not on purpose. At some point while doing this remix, I just suddenly it hit me, hey, this sounds kind of distorted. Why is that? And I tried to get rid of it, like look at the gain staging and stuff, but then it just hit me, why use so much time to remove this distortion? Maybe it's a happy accident. I mean, it kind of adds to the sound, like this telephone mid-rangey sound, so I kind of kept it in actually. So it continues pretty far until this middle section. And then it kind of returns in the outro section. And I fade it in, as I like to do with a lot of my stuff. You can see both the Pro-One bass and the Scepter box is getting faded in. Actually, the Pro-One starts first and then the Scepter box gets faded in right after. Alright, let's move on. So we've got another Jupiter 4 here, and that's some arpeggiation, mostly in the last, maybe third of the remix, these two parts here. Let's have a listen. It's this one. So as you can hear, it's pretty heavy filtered. Like I can explain that in a bit. Let's hear the last part. This one I kind of like improvised with an echo also, and the echo is a huge part of this sound. It kind of makes the sound, the arpeggiation. So the arpeggiation kind of plays into the echo. They kind of play together. So if you remove the echo, it's not the same at all. And so let's look at the echo, but also the filtering. The filtering, as far as I remember, I had a bus, like I called it pre, and it's this one. And I use this Volcano plugin, which is a filter plugin from FabFilter, and all it kind of does is it's a low pass filter. So and this is maybe, I'm not sure if it's the only one, but it's one of the very few automation I make in this remix. I'm not a fan of automating anything because I feel like it's kind of like it's a vortex, like you can disappear in if you start this whole automation route. You can just, I mean, it never stops. So I would much rather have small imperfections in my stuff instead of automating, like getting it to be perfect. But this exact effect needed automation to work. So I did that, and you can kind of see what happens here. All right, let's have a look at the Volcano filter effect here. I'm using it in this middle section. And pay attention to the resonant peak right here. It's getting automated in this section. Yeah, so that was the filter effect. And this block, it's still a Jupiter 4 arpeggiation, but it's not filtered in the same way. It's more clean sounding, right? All right.